Let's begin. Hi, good afternoon or good morning from wherever you are joining us today. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, Respect Life Month webinar, Diocesan Leaders Discuss Death Penalty Education. My name is Emma Tacky, and I serve as the Associate Director of Community Engagement for Catholic Mobilizing Network. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we begin. I believe all your microphones are muted as of right now, but if you experience any technical issues, you may use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to message with me. And there will be time for questions following the main discussion. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. And this webinar will last no longer than an hour, and it is being recorded, so it'll be available for viewing after we're done here today. And you will receive an email with a link to the recording in the coming days. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, again, welcome to today's webinar, very aptly named Respect Life Month webinar, Diocesan Leaders Discuss Death Penalty Education. What the title lacks in creativity, I think it more than makes up for it in its utility for describing what we're discussing today. As you all are aware, Respect Life Month is a time for Catholics to reflect more deeply on the God-given dignity of all human life. Beginning on Respect Life Sunday, the first Sunday of October, Catholics across the U.S. recommit themselves to the work of uplifting this core tenet of the faith. So our main purpose for today's webinar is to hear from diocesan leaders from around the country on what they have found to be effective ways to educate about the death penalty in their respective dioceses. Catholic Mobilizing Network seeks to encourage and assist dioceses in the United States in their efforts to bring the issue of the death penalty into their communities. So in some ways, I think this webinar is going to be just as helpful to me as I think of how CMN can best serve our diocesan partners when it comes to education efforts. But really, we at CMN and the panelists today hope this webinar can serve as a place of inspiration and that it lends a sense of camaraderie as you discern how you might want to bring the issue of the death penalty into your community. Because I know it can certainly be challenging more often than not. So if we can move on to our next slide. Briefly, here is our agenda for today. Like I said, the bulk of our hour together will be spent hearing from our diocesan panelists, but I also wanted to share with any newcomers a little about who Catholic Mobilizing Network is and how we operate. Then, in order to set the context for, excuse me, for today's discussion, I will reiterate what our Catholic faith says about the death penalty. And of course, this isn't anything you don't know already, but it's helpful to have a reminder. And then I will also spend a few minutes going over the current status of the death penalty, including the recent developments of federal executions, just because the death penalty is something we at CMN think about and talk about all the time, but I know it's not always at the forefront of your minds within the diocese as you're handling so many different life issues that are all of equal importance. So I thought this might be helpful context to set before our discussion. And then after our panel discussion, we will have a few minutes for a Q&A and then end with some timely resources and opportunities that we have available. Okay, moving on to our next slide. So Catholic Mobilizing Network is the national Catholic organization working to end the use of the death penalty and to promote restorative justice through education, advocacy, and prayer. Next slide, please. And while Catholic Mobilizing Network is based in Washington, D.C., historically in our 11 or so years as an organization, the strategy for CMN and the broader movement to end the death penalty has been built around abolishing the practice of capital punishment on a state-by-state basis. We haven't focused on legislation on the federal level until really this year with the resumption of federal executions, which we will touch on in just a minute. Slide, please. Again, this is very familiar to you all, I know, based on the gospel value that every human is created in the image and likeness of God. CMN expresses the fundamental belief that all those who have caused or been impacted by crime should be treated with dignity. You can see here we have the current catechism teaching up on the screen. For a long time, the official Catholic Church teaching maintained that the death penalty was appropriate only under the very rare circumstances, that a death sentence was the only way of safeguarding the common good. However, as our standards of decency have evolved throughout time and societies have ensured structures in place to protect society from individuals who have caused great harm, the Church's 3 most recent popes have all made public statements calling for the worldwide abolition of the death penalty. And on August 2nd, 2018, building on the teaching of Pope St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Francis and the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith formalized that the death penalty is inadmissible, and then the revised text of the Catholic Catechism really crystallized the Church's teaching on the death penalty. Okay, moving on. The past 10 years, we have seen tremendous advances in the death penalty abolition movement. 22 states have officially abolished their death penalty. 7 of those states have ended the death penalty in the last 10 years, Colorado being the most recent in March 2020. Additionally, in this time frame of 10 years, the governors of 4 other states have imposed moratoriums on executions in their states. One of those states being California in 2018, which was significant when Governor Gavin Newsom declared a death penalty moratorium in the state because California has the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere. Slide, please. So 2/3 of states within the United States have moved away from the practice of capital punishment. Only a handful of states continue to carry out executions. So these trends that we're seeing on a state level are really a sharp contrast to the recent actions of the federal government. We see the resumption of federal executions as wrong-headed and out of step with public opinion on the death penalty. Slide, please. And you can see here, there are some quick facts and figures on the current status of the death penalty nationwide. Regarding federal executions, in July of 2019, the Department of Justice first announced its plans to resume federal executions after nearly 17 years. They scheduled 5 executions over the next several months. However, due to a barrage of legal challenges, all of those executions were delayed. And then, of course, we flash forward to this summer in 2020, when on June 15th, the Department of Justice announced that in July, 3 men were scheduled for execution within a 5-day period of one another. A 4th and 5th execution were scheduled for the end of August. And of course, this was deeply concerning because we know the reasons why the federal death penalty is wrong are really the same reasons why the death penalty on a state level is wrong. It's riddled with errors and misconduct. Executions stem from our country's history of racial violence, with direct links to our past of lynching Black Americans. It's geographically isolated and arbitrary, and just simply out of step with the national trend of decreasing rates of executions and death sentences. Slide, please. So, since this June announcement from the Department of Justice, 7 men have been executed by the federal government. Another execution is scheduled next month. And we have an action step for that man who is named Orlando Hall, scheduled for execution on November 19th, that I will share near the end of our time together this afternoon. Slide, please. So, all this to say that even though executions on a state-by-state level are decreasing, we do need to continue the momentum of working for the abolition of the death penalty, especially since federal executions have resumed. The urgency we're facing of helping Catholics understand and lean into the gospel call to honor human dignity for all people is as important as ever. which is why I am so thrilled we are having this discussion today. And I'm very grateful to our panelists who have given up their time to be a part of this conversation. We have representatives from 7 different dioceses in 7 different states. And it's so wonderful that you all are here. And thank you to our attendees for joining us as well. So I think without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. We have 5 questions today. I will kick us off with the first question, and I would love to hear from each one of our panelists. And I'll go around and call on you to start. So I'll ask that, before you answer the question, our panelists, please give your name and the diocese you're representing and your role within the diocese. So our first question is, can you share a couple examples of how your diocese has educated or brought awareness to the issue of the death penalty that you have found to be energizing or effective? And I'm just going to go around my screen to see who pops up for me first, and that is Sabrina. Sabrina, would you get us started, please?
Sure, thanks, Emma. I'm Sabrina Burton-Schultz. I'm the Director of Life, Justice, and Advocacy for the Diocese of St. Petersburg in Florida. So happy to be with you. A couple of things I can mention. One is very simple, because we are a state with the death penalty in Florida. We have used the death penalty in very recent times. Whenever we have an execution, we will send out the names to our bulletin editors, to our priests, send it to our liturgists, so that we'll actually draft prayers to the faithful that they can use. So we send the name of the person executed, or we send a petition or a prayer of the faithful with their name, with their mentioning their families, and praying for the victims by name and their families as well. So it's simple, but we feel like it helps to educate. Another thing that we've done is similar to all the other dioceses in the state of Florida. We followed the lead of Bishop Estevez from the Diocese of St. Augustine, who instituted a Cities for Life prayer vigil in his diocese each November. So following the lead of the community of Sant'Egidio out of Rome, he said, our city may not be ready to symbolically abolish the death penalty or to light a monument, but I can light my cathedral. And so that next year we lit our cathedral. We held a small prayer service, and we've moved it about the diocese since then. Once we even held it across from the courthouse in Tampa, in the Courthouse Square Park. So we've not drawn huge numbers, but it's a very visible witness. And then we send prayers of the faithful to all of our parishes that same weekend.
Excellent. Thank you, Sabrina, so much. And yes, I just want to do a plug for the Sant'Egidio community and the Cities for Life. Such a beautiful initiative. Jean, do you want to take us away next?
Sure. Jean Hill with the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City, and I am the Director of the Office of Life, Justice, and Peace, which also basically includes the duties of the Catholic Conference. We don't have a Catholic Conference, so me and my bishop are the Catholic Conference. So a lot of the advocacy work, and we are a diocese also with the death penalty, and a state that reinstated the firing squad as the more humane method of execution. So we've been working on this issue for a long, long time. And I think one of the most effective things we've done to educate our Catholics, at least, on the death penalty is to include it in all of our Respect Life presentations, really to try and push that idea of the consistent ethic of life and make sure that we're not just talking about the beginning of life or even end of life care, but we are including those who may not be so innocent, but certainly have that same dignity of life. So we always make sure to include that component. And the sort of fortunate thing about our state and its position on the death penalty, we've had death penalty related bills in our state legislature every year since 2015, which gives us a lot of opportunity to really do that education. And so the other kind of effective thing we did, we had the 1 year of a death penalty repeal bill and a assisted suicide legalization bill at the same time. And we were able to do a postcard campaign on both of those issues, where we gave the postcards to every parish and asked them to have their parishioners, gave kind of a script for what to say and asked them to have the parishioners fill those out. So it really kind of put both those issues in front of people. and in front of people who may have felt differently on each of those issues from Catholic teaching, but seeing them together, we're trying to just reinforce that consistent ethic of life message. So just a couple of quick examples.
Great, thank you, Jean, thank you. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Thanks, Emma. My name is Rachel Lostrup, and I work as the Associate Director in the Office of Social Ministries for the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. And I think one of the coolest things we've been able to do is partner with a fantastic organization in our state called Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. So something that I've tried to do in my position is bring in other experts or other organizations that can really give us a great deal of insight into the issue of the death penalty. One of my main roles is to support social ministers at the parishes, and I will often bring them together, or used to bring them together in person for meetings for dialogue about a variety of social justice issues. So one of the things I've tried to do is to bring in these individuals to share with us about work around the death penalty. And this has included creating a space where individuals can dialogue and understanding that everyone in the Catholic Church or everyone who is passionate about social justice might not necessarily be on the same page regarding the death penalty. So it's been important for me to kind of just create that space where we can all have an honest conversation and learn authentically about these issues and really dive into how the death penalty is a part of our Catholic social teaching and how it's directly tied into who Christ was and what the call of the Gospels is. So I've been fortunate to draw on the expertise of organizations like that. And then we've partnered with the Catholic Mobilizing Network to come to some of our prison ministry summits that we've held. Prison ministry is one of my main initiatives. And so I've tried to incorporate death penalty education just in the general prison ministry sector as well. So those are kind of the main things that we've tried to do.
Wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much. And yes, the Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, they've always been such an excellent partner and mover and shaker within the abolition movement. Kevin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Fitzpatrick with the Archdiocese of New Orleans. I'm the director of the Office of Justice of Peace at Catholic Charities here in New Orleans. And we have really three levels that I could speak to of education, but I want to give some quick background. In January, Sister Helen and Archbishop Amen and many others celebrated 10 years of an unofficial moratorium of the death penalty here. So we're close to 11 years now without the death penalty. And that was kind of an isolated case where he gave up the fight. So really, aside from that, it's been close to 18 years since we've had the death penalty. So we're fortunate that even though it's legal in Louisiana, it hasn't been utilized quite much in almost a generation. Having said that, we still have been close to overturning the death penalty in the last several sessions. And that's part of our education. Our advocate, our one person who houses the Louisiana Catholic Conference of Bishops, among others, has worked to educate our legislators on the issues around the death penalty. And this is one that's hard because we're often at odds with the Christian Coalition, who comes out and starts quoting the Bible. And so we often have Bible quote wars on the House floor in Baton Rouge. Another level of education is Archbishop Amen and Sister Helen jointly wrote a letter in 2019 to the youth of the Archdiocese. We have 21 high schools just in the Archdiocese alone. And so that's kind of the low-hanging fruit we find in the Catholic social teaching for high school juniors and seniors. They're very receptive to it. And most of the high school teachers are teaching that the death penalty is wrong. And we need to adhere to that. And the last is a young woman. I say young, she's in her 40s. She's young to me. Recently went through RCIA in April of 2019. She became a Catholic and is on our Racial Harmony Commission. And she's been on fire for this issue. She's a lawyer and worked with 3 deacons in her deanery and the dean of the deanery to write a letter against the death penalty last year. It took about 8 or 9 months to get it written. And I kept offering her encouragement and direction on how to deal with church structure because the dean insisted on unanimity in his deanery, and he had one priest, one pastor who's a holdout who refused to go on board. And of course, he was a young Catholic wearing, Beretta wearing priest, but he said he didn't like it at all. He wanted to rewrite it. And he sat on it for 2 or 3 months, but in the long run, he did do heavy editing to the document. And most of the priests, including the deacons that were on board, said it came out to be a better document. So the deanery issued their own letters to the Catholics in a very red baiting, extremely conservative deanery in the archdiocese. So that was a huge step, and we just hope that that was able to turn some people's hearts in a part of our diocese that's not open to this part of the life message of the gospel.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I remember when that effort with the deanery was going on, and it's so rewarding to see that it did happen. That's excellent. Pat Delgado in Texas, do you want to go next? You are muted. Let me. There you go.
Okay. Pat Delgado, El Paso, Texas, far from Huntsville, closer to New Mexico, which doesn't have the death penalty, So what we do, two main consistent things are monthly vigils against the death penalty, prayer vigils in several parishes. And now with COVID, we do just a Zoom one, anybody that can come on. And these include the backgrounds of the people, the liturgy that is on the Catholic Mobilizing Network, pretty much, backgrounds on the people being scheduled for execution that month, and reflections. And I try to pick up 1 or 2 new reflections every month that are current, that are kind of relevant to what's going on in the country or what's going on in Texas. And, they could be the words or stories by inmates or victims or families or bishops or, pretty much a variety, just to see different perspectives, because personally they were the hooks that got me involved in the whole ministry to begin with. And at the intercession time, we really encourage people to pray for who's ever on their hearts. If some of the times it's someone who does visitation and they just want to pray for somebody that they've been meeting with, and I think that makes it more personal for them. And then the other piece is demonstrations on days of execution in Texas, in front of the county courthouse if it's in Texas, or the federal courthouse if it's a federal one this year. And we do our county courthouse because we really wanted to have a presence, because our district attorney was responsible for putting several people on death row. And he's a Catholic, and we just wanted to make that message that this is not, it's not, he thinks he has to do it by law. And, so those are the 2 big things. And it's a pedestrian involvement, and people were very, very supportive. They were so happy that we were doing it and wanting to share their stories with the injustice system. And but 15 months ago, we had the Walmart shooting, and that really, really put it to the test, because it brought it right home. And our bishop, I just have to give a shout out, Bishop Mark Seitz, he wrote a pastoral letter 2 months after the shooting, and it was about racism. But his final words were, we cannot let evil and death have the last word, and we have to, show that we believe that there is redemption. And it was so powerful, and he's been so supportive of the families, and but very strong against the death penalty. So I think that's kind of, having an impact on the Catholics. It's very humbling, because non-Catholics are more apt to be against the death penalty than the Catholics in the pew. But yeah.
Pat, thank you so much. And certainly the leadership and the support from the bishops really can and often does make all the difference in the state when it comes to talking about the death penalty. Father Chuck, I wonder if you might want to go next.
I'd be happy to, and it's wonderful to hear all of these things that are happening around the country. I'm Father Chuck Durante. I'm the Vicar General of the Diocese of Reno and rector at our cathedral, and I chair our Life, Peace, and Justice Commission. And a couple of things that stood out for me with this question that I think have been effective to a degree anyway, and certainly energizing. One is some years back we did an interfaith gathering with a speaker from the organization Murder Victims Families for Reconciliation. Probably you're familiar with those, with that group. And we had a panel discussion with several faith leaders, each kind of sharing their positions, their statements in opposition to the death penalty, some Christian, some non-Christian faiths. And then we followed that with a speaker who shared her experience. It was a murder victim family member, and that she stood opposed to the death penalty. Very powerful in itself, but especially because often we get this pushback from people who support the death penalty and invoke family victims or victims' family members. So I thought that was a very helpful tool, made people think a little differently. And then secondly, which a couple of you had mentioned, doing vigils on the night of an execution. When we first started doing these executions in Nevada, they were always held at midnight. And so now they were moved to 9 p.m. But it was an odd thing, and again, a witness to what we were doing, was trying to keep it secret almost. But we'd send media releases and notices out to our parishes, to the church. And because church was involved, of course, the TV interviews and news articles, it got attention. And we started doing those vigils, sadly, in 1996. And did them in 98, 99, 2001, 2004. 2006 was the last one because we haven't had an execution since then. There's no moratorium, there's no law, although one's been introduced every session, as I think Jean mentioned. We have legislative sessions every 2 years. So every time it comes up, it doesn't go anywhere. We also were present at the federal courthouse early on in the 2000s. This last ones that have happened just came on so quickly. We haven't been organized enough to do it, but it's so important. So I find that these rouse lots of energy and interest at that moment anyway. So it makes people at least think about it. It gets them moving a little, but then sadly it tends to fizzle out once the execution is over. But I still think it's one of the more effective ways at the moment to highlight. So those are a couple of things that came to my mind.
Wonderful, Father Chuck. Thank you so much. And we are certainly playing the long game when it comes to introducing new repeal bills into sessions year after year. Deacon Robert, as our final panelist for this question, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Deacon Robert Vigil from the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and I am the director of the Office of Pastoral Outreach. I work closely with my colleague Ann Avalon, who oversees the Respect Life and Social Justice Office. So we pretty much work hand in hand, but my office is the boots on the ground. Focus is on the prison ministry is one of the focuses. And so I go in as well as with our volunteers, and we meet these individuals. Right now we have 2 individuals on death row who were grandfathered in when we passed the law back in 2009, which was a lot of work, but it's easy to just forget, and we have to keep telling the stories. So I also work ecumenically with others, doing the same type of work and advocacy, but it's telling the story, first of all, to our bishop, our archbishop, and to our curia, telling the story to our deaneries, telling the story to our parishes, telling the story constantly. It's I think it's great that we have Respect Life Month, but it should be Respect Life Year, all year round. I mean, the gospel message is respect life every day, and so it's it's telling that story, but we also work in solidarity with all of you. When we hear these names, we include them in our petitions. We let the parishes know what's going on, and we just get the word out, that letting everybody know that this is not just an issue for our diocese. The fact that we worked very hard to overturn that, but it's an issue that we work together as one church. So it's just, for me, it's gratifying to just personalize that message. When I meet these individuals and they tell me their story, sometimes I sit there in awe myself, because I have to put my forgiveness face on. But you know, I'm also a chaplain in the hospital, and about 2 weeks ago, I was called to pray for this individual who had already been anointed, but they were going to put him in comfort care. And the doctor, the wife, had already made the decision, look, let's put this guy, let's put him out of his misery. And as we were praying, which is prayer is a big deal, this individual opened his eyes with a big smile and greeted his whole family. And guess what? That put the end to that little piece. But that prayer, I mean, we have to constantly pray on it, and it has to be included all year long, not just monthly. But it's just the constant, the three pieces that you said, the education, the advocacy, and the prayer, hand in hand every day.
Thank you, Deacon Robert. And I so agree that personal stories and testimony really get to the heart of the issue and can transform hearts and minds more than facts and figures ever could. So thank you. Okay, for our next question, my dear panelists. Now this is a question that I'm always thinking about, and it's kind of the question that defines my work in a lot of ways. But what are the greatest challenges when it comes to educating about the death penalty in your diocese? And maybe we could have, I want to ask 4 people from the panel to maybe expand on this for a couple minutes. So I wonder, Sabrina, if I could put you on the spot again and ask, what are some challenges within your diocese on educating about this issue?
Sure, thanks, Emma. You know, a few years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who directs the Protestant Pregnancy Center. And he said, you know, Sabrina, I can't agree with you yet about the death penalty. I struggle with it, but I really admire the consistency of your church. And as I thought about that, I realized that that is something that I am immensely proud of, being Catholic. I'm so proud of that consistent ethic of life, that seamless garment, if you will. So with this contentious election, people are sending me homilies right and left from this priest and that priest around the country. I actually listened to a homily yesterday where a priest was really dismantling and breaking apart the seamless garment. He really misunderstood the whole teaching, the whole ethic. And I think that that's really common in our church today. And I realize that that's probably a failure on my part in this office and not really drawing those connections enough. Yeah, I prayed at 40 Days for Life this morning, one of our vigils. And if I had polled all of my friends and people there, probably half of them would have said to me, you know, at least half would have said, you know, Sabrina, that's, you know, yeah, that's important, but really look at the numbers. Look at how many people are dying here. Here at this clinic alone, every day, more than have died in our state in the past couple of years. So it becomes a numbers game rather than a teaching that we have to weave together and teach consistently, always tying it together. Because if we really respect the human person, if we really believe in human dignity, you know, it's not a numbers game. It's really, we've got to hold them both up, and the end of life issues, and really, I think a lot of other life issues as well. And I think we need to hold up the immigration and refugees, and really help people to see the broader issues and the connectivity better than I do anyway. So it's my struggle.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think the challenge of educating around how each life issue is as important as the next is something that, I mean, personally, I find it challenging sometimes too. The faith is not always easy, so I appreciate the struggle there. Jean, I wonder if you might expand next on this question.
Sure, and I think, and a lot of what Sabrina said, I would echo. I think that one of the things I know we have worked a lot on through op-eds and in our diocesan paper in the secular press and wherever we can is just the basic human tendency to want vengeance. And you always get back, but look at what they did, and it's just overcoming that side. It's very human to want that vengeance, but we have to move past that, and certainly we shouldn't allow our state to exact it for us. That's giving government a lot of power. So it's overcoming that. And we have we have this odd situation where one of our top prosecutors is also the victim rights coordinator. And so he has been very successful at sharing this narrative that this is justice for the families. And, those of us who have been doing this work understand this is nowhere near justice for the families. And trying to just work through that with people to understand that, when we tell a family, you're going to be faced with the hatred you feel for 30 years, because this person isn't actually going to be executed very soon. And if we're saying that this is justice for families, we have 9 people on death row, actually 8. One of them passed away of old age, and probably the most notorious one passed away of old age. But if we are saying this is justice, then there's only 8 families in the state getting justice for their murdered loved one. And if you think there's only been 8 murders in Utah, you haven't paid attention to our state, which you guys wouldn't, but people in the state know there's more. This isn't justice. This is the exact opposite of justice. So trying to get past those very common and very successful narratives of we need to get our vengeance, and this is the only way the families get justice, and really trying to help people understand that no, you're not giving justice, you're not giving vengeance, you're just creating new victims.
Yes, well said, Jane. Often the narrative that we hear about the death penalty is that it gives families closure and justice. But of course, if you do any sort of deeper research into that notion, that it's not true. Father Chuck, I wonder if you can be the final panelist to speak on this question, and then we will move on to our next question.
Sure. I think that the biggest obstacle is Catholics not accepting the Catholic teaching, as has been touched on here. That's the biggest one, I think, in addressing Catholics on this topic. The emotional arguments always come in, as was mentioned, that really they block the realities of discrimination of the death penalty in its application, and certainly the objective truth we hold of their human dignity not being lost. So I think painting the murder victim or the murderer as a monster, all of those images that people then can't get beyond. And I find that's probably the biggest obstacle to getting people to even consider that this is an option. The vengeance is so powerful in people. And even being out in those vigils, we often will see that. The ones who drive by and blow their horns and scream out of the windows, kill them, and you see it. And to me, that's another thing to be highlighted, that those are examples of what we're doing as a society and what we're encouraging. Challenges are huge, but I echo again what's been said here for sure.
I think in a way, maybe it's comforting to know that the challenges where we find in one diocese are kind of universal across all these other dioceses of, we certainly have work to do in terms of transforming hearts and minds. For our next question, I wonder if Pat, Rachel, Kevin, and Deacon Robert might expand on this question, and I'll call on you. But what advice would you give to someone in a diocesan role who wants to bring the issue of the death penalty into their diocese, but isn't sure where to start? Pat, do you want to take this one and for the next minute or so?
Well, I inherited the vigils, but I did, so at that time I started doing tabling events at any pro-life march or event. I asked permission, and always had a sign-up sheet, and then asking what parish they were from, and if maybe, you know, they would be interested in me showing a film or doing a little talk at a confirmation class or with the parents, sponsors of confirmation, and that works out pretty well. The option for the poor dinner is another one. You know, there's long lines waiting to be served, and they all come by my table, and I have information about the death penalty. It's mostly spreading awareness. You know, in my diocese, people want to sign up for to be restorative justice ministers, but they all want to do visitation. And we don't have death row here. We don't even have big prisons, and so we can't. Not everybody can do visitation. There's limits. But to get them to be interested in participating against the death penalty is a trick. I would say the Catholic newspaper, but it's not automatic. I send in things and they don't get put in the paper, so I have to really work at that. Let's see. That's, I don't know.
I think those are really, really good places to start, and it's, yeah.
We have shown films, and like the ACLU brought in Anthony Graves, and I put that out there because, you know, having an exoneree speak is just so powerful. And we don't get many speakers to come to El Paso. So that was good, but again, getting people there is the problem. Yeah.
Definitely, especially, I mean, in the time of the pandemic, which is a sentence I never thought I would ever say. But, you know, it's kind of the elephant in the room of educating about the death penalty is hard. And then add a pandemic, and it's like, well, this feels almost impossible. But of course, we know that there are things that we can still do. Rachel, would you like to go next? Where should a diocesan person start if they want to get going on this issue?
I think one of the most important things you can do, and it was already mentioned, is to really draw upon the power of storytelling. One of the best things that we did for our prison ministry summits was to bring in individuals who are formerly incarcerated to share their story. And I think the more we can humanize these individuals, the more that we can show others that there is so much more to a person than their worst crime. So I think that's one thing that we can do. It's not easy to get individuals to share those stories, but I think if you have the opportunity, that's huge. I also think something as simple as starting a book study or a film study with films or books like Just Mercy is huge, and just kind of getting that dialogue started. I also think if you can connect the issue of death penalty to race and mental health, that intersectionality is really important. And you have individuals who are already so passionate about these issues of racial injustice and mental health. And so if you can draw in those people to see that death penalty is very much intertwined with those issues, then I think you can get a lot more people involved in the conversation and in the work. And then I think one of the last things that we can do is, and I kind of said it before, but it's to draw upon scripture for this work, and to also draw upon the work of saints. She's not a quintessential social justice saint, but my patron saint is Saint Maria Goretti, and her story is the epitome of forgiveness and grace and redemption. And so I think the more that we can point our communities, our parishioners, to the lives of those who came before us, who beautifully exemplified what it means to be an example of grace and forgiveness, I think that's an easy way to start planting those seeds.
Yes. I mean, when in doubt, look to the saints, definitely for that inspiration and hope. And I think, Rachel, the point you made about the intersection of folks who care about race issues and then mental health issues, the intersections of that with the death penalty, I mean, cannot be underscored enough how deeply those issues are embedded together. And I just quickly want to do a plug for the Death Penalty Information Center recently released an 80+ page report on how race and the death penalty are intersect, and it's very excellent. Kevin, and then Deacon Robert, I wonder, do you guys want to take the last part of this question? or be our last two panelists for this question. Go ahead,
Well,
Kevin.
what I was going to say is the same as Rachel said and what Jean had said. But so as they were speaking, I kind of switched my answer as I had a new thought that just came to me. But I did want to emphasize the storytelling. We had an article in the newspaper about a young man committed a murder, or was allegedly committed a murder at 17, was given life in prison, and then was exonerated 17 years later. So he was 34 when he came out of prison, and he just graduated from college at University of New Orleans. So, you know, that's something to celebrate, and then that made the press, of course, and then, you know, you just spread, you know, I sent that out to people all over. So it's like this is just one example of why, you know, and then he talks about the torture that it was being on death row and to be in solitary and to see what the other inmates were going through. He tells their stories, and he's a real advocate for the guys that are still there. And just not knowing, you know, the anxiety of never knowing what to expect when you might be executed, and that he said he's not the only one that is innocent. My other thought is connect with your Catholic Campaign for Human Development groups. There are always elections. We're so focused right now on the presidential election, and you know, and we know our vote only counts so much. In many of our states, we know that the electoral college is pretty well set. So, but you know, we had a very close governor's race last November, and our CCHD groups got there and created a forum and asked about the death penalty, and got both the Democrat and the Republican to make a commitment on the death penalty. We now have, along with this coming election, the district attorney in Orleans Parish is up for election, and the CCHD groups have already asked them directly what they're going to do about the death penalty. And two have said no, and one says only in extreme cases, which he's not able to define. But that's a huge step, because our current district attorney has sent a lot of people to death row, and many of you know the legacy of Harry Connick, who was the district attorney for some 30 years or so, who can set a record for sending people to death row in New Orleans. And likewise, in our neighboring civil parish, Jefferson Parish, we had a lot of people sent to death row by the district attorney, and a Catholic, you know, a good Catholic parishioner was elected district attorney several years ago, and he said he brought in a change of culture. You know, he said there's no more excitement about the death penalty, you know, and that he had to fire some of his lawyers who were proud of putting people on death row. He says this is the wrong message. We're not sending it out in South Louisiana anymore. So we really have a lot of ability to advocate for the people that we elect to office. And we have a lot more influence on the district attorney than the president of the United States. So I think we have to keep that in mind.
Definitely, yes, that's such a good point, that those more local races are often even more impactful than something like a presidential election, for sure. Deacon Robert, do you want to finish us off with this last part of this question?
Sure. Of course, I echo what all of you have said. You know, Rachel, the story of the saints, man, that's powerful. I've seen young women, and I'm there talking about pastoral outreach, and these are young confirmation girls who tell the story, and it's like, it's powerful. And these young kids, you could see how they just open up their minds just because of that story. But also, you know, I look at all of you here and I see disciples. And if someone comes to me and says, Deacon, how do we start this? I'm going to turn to all of you with all this expertise here, as well as many others around the country that we've networked with, to just kind of do a little bit of homework before we kick something off, you know, off the ground. But more importantly is the storytelling. I can't say enough about that as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Deacon Robert. And I think, you know, we have about 5 more minutes left in our time for this discussion. And so I'm wondering if we can end on this question. And I'd love to hear again from each one of our panelists. Dreaming big here. If money were no object, if we didn't have a pandemic, if all the resources were available to you, what would your ideal death penalty education or advocacy effort or project look like in your diocese? And Sabrina, if you want to go first there.
Sure. After hearing from my esteemed panelists here, I think I'm going to change my answer a little bit. You know, unfortunately in Florida, we hold the record of the more exonerees than any other state. We have 30 exonerations from death row. And not all of them are still in the state or even alive at this point, but I would hold a big event with all of the exonerees so that people could meet them, hear their stories, and see their humanity. And not only hear their stories about, you know, their time on death row, or not only hear their stories about how they came to be framed or end up on death row, what the situation or the circumstances were, but to really hear about the people that they got to know on death row, how they cared for one another. And Juan Melendez talks about how the people around him and cells taught him English so that he could raise his case to some attorneys and actually become exonerated eventually. They talk about friends that they've seen walk to the death house, never to return. These are really human stories. I would invite chaplains as well, or chaplains on death row, to come in and talk about the families that they minister to so that people could really understand that, you know, this is impacting other families as well. People on death row are someone's child, someone's father, someone's brother. Thanks.
I love that, Sabrina. Thank you. Just really, I mean, humanizing our brothers and sisters who are on death row cannot be overstated how important and impactful that is. Jean, would you like to go next?
Sure. So my ideal would be we didn't have to have one because we had already repealed it, but that's not going to happen. So yes. My second, if I was thinking big, I mean, I would love it. It would include Brian Stevenson. It would include our foreign-born priests who really jump all over this issue because they have seen it. Many of them have been from countries that have abused this kind of power. And when we were doing our postcard campaign, it was our foreign-born priests, many of them who were the top supporters of what we were doing in the effort. And they had incredible stories themselves to tell about the experiences they had had in their home countries. And to me, it would be, long term, it would include more people who really wanted to do prison ministry. Because I think once you've worked with prisoners in the prison, you get that redemption idea. You see people who are at their lowest point in their lives and are able, are forced, but also able to really come to terms with what they've done. And you see the grace that happens within those walls or can happen within those walls and really it is the story part of it, but it's the story seeing also where they're at now and understanding that, prison is supposed to be about correction. And that isn't just punishment, that is giving people the opportunity and the tools they need to really address what led them to where they are and how they got there and what happened to the people that they harmed. So it'd be a restorative justice possibility as well, a real understanding of restorative justice. And then ultimately it will result in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of phone calls to our legislature, forcing them into repealing the death penalty in our state.
Yes, I love it. Thank you, Jean. Rachel, do you want to go next?
I think one of my ideal initiatives would to do more with youth and young adults on this issue. I think more opportunities to get our young folks talking about these issues, learning about these issues, sending them all to something like the Restorative Justice Conference that you all have coming up. I think that when it comes to justice and peace, we have to start with our young people. And so I would just love to create more opportunities and resources for them.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. And I have some more information about the Restorative Justice Conference CMN is hosting that I will share with you all at the tail end of our hour here. Kevin, quickly, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Sabrina mentioned this at the outset. I'd like this to be seen, the death penalty, as part of a whole, the seamless garment, that people could really understand that capital punishment is the logical consequence of the school to prison pipeline. That this is all very closely interwoven. We've had a huge outcry about racism, and that this is clearly a racist policy, and in spite of the fact that many people of other races are obviously executed, that this is really part of a racist package, that folks could see the big picture. The other thing I'd really like to see is get our permanent diaconate on board. President company excluded. I know Deacon Roberto, you're very much on board with this, but when I go out, it just, the deacons are not buying it. They're not preaching it. You know, if folks heard this from the pulpit, from their deacons, or if they heard it in day-to-day life, it would be a lot more convincing. But the deacons tell me that the bishops are wrong, that Pope Francis is crazy. This is coming from our ordained ministers, and it's really disappointing. And I would love to see them not only say that, but really have a wholehearted conviction in the whole teaching of the church. And I don't like to see our deacons being smorgasbord towards Catholics. It's really tough, and they're really not open to hearing a different narrative.
Really good point. Deacon Robert, I wonder if you want to go next after that.
Yes, amen. Amen to you. You know, all our deacons should be doing this. All our priests should be on board with this. All our bishops should be on board with this. But in the reality of the world, I think the key right now that I would like to see is in dreaming big is we're called to discipleship to the very end. But we that have been doing it for some time, we got to mentor our youth. We got to teach our youth how to advocate. We got to get our youth excited about respecting life. Until we do that, then we'll see some big changes in this world. But it's a big task, but that's a big dream that I want to see.
Wonderful. Thank you. Father Chuck, do you want to go next? And then Pat will end with you.
Sure. In February, we will, I'm sure, have another abolition bill put forward. So my ideal would be kind of touching on a couple of what others have said, but that we would have a campaign that would reach every parish, that would be addressed from the pulpit, either by the priest or the deacon or a lay person who's been given that power to do that, which is no problem doing that, and encouraging a postcard campaign that could flood our legislators with what our teaching is. Interestingly, we'll probably also have a measure on the end of life question that somebody meant. So I love that idea of putting those two together. And then the successful result would be the death penalty would be finally abolished. And I think that would be an ideal campaign on my side.
Yes.
I agree. That sounds like a great idea to be. Pat, so we are coming up on time, but Pat, I want you to give you like the next 20 seconds or so to say what your ideal would be. And then I'm going to keep you all here for the next couple minutes to do action steps, and then we'll be done.
Okay, real quick, I agree with everybody. I've learned so much. One thing I don't know enough of is website and social media. Facebook page, I really want to make better use of those. And it's a very heavy lift to go through the diocesan page and social media. There are other restorative justice pages that aren't, you know, a seamless garment kind of thing at all. And so I would, if I'm dreaming, I'd like to find somebody that could help me with that for outreach.
Pat, amen to the difficulties of technology. I'm right there with you. Well, my dear panelists, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your thoughtfulness that you bring always to this issue. I'm so grateful. And now that I have been thinking of you, you'll be getting emails from me. So I hope you are prepared for that. Moving on, in our last couple of minutes together, Caitlin, could you start screen sharing again, and then we'll share some quick action steps here. Okay, so quickly, I mentioned this earlier, but the next federal execution is that of Orlando Hall for November 19th. We have a letter that you can submit through our website addressed to President Trump and Attorney General William Barr. Barr is a Catholic, and you can personalize these letters on behalf of Mr. Hall, asking for his execution to be stopped. That's one concrete action step you can take as a diocesan leader. Share it within your diocese if you are looking for ideas of how to bring this issue to light. And then moving on to our next slide, we have some resources and some timely events coming up. The first one is the Restorative Justice Conference we're hosting at the end of the month. This conference is going to be totally virtual and will take place on October 27th, 29th, and the 31st. This was supposed to be an in-person conference, but because of the pandemic, we've adapted, which I think might be even for the better, because it allows people from all over the country to attend this conference and not just those local to California. So please register today. And then also we have our Just Mercy Catholic Study Guide. You may have seen the film when it was released last January. That was adapted from the book of the same name of the real life account of attorney Brian Stevenson, the executive director and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and his client Walter McMillan, who was wrongfully sentenced to death in Alabama. Through a series of reflection questions and supplementary resources, this study guide serves as an accompaniment to the film and offers viewers a way to explore the Catholic call to uphold the sanctity of life within the US criminal legal system. And then we have this virtual vigil held through Zoom on November 19th for Orlando Hall, where it's an hour that we have together of prayer and music and contemplative silence as we hold Orlando Hall, his family, and his victims in prayer for the day of that execution. And then lastly, before I let you all go, please stay in touch. If we can move on to the next slide, you will see my email address is there. Please email me with any questions or concerns or ideas, and then our social media is there as well. Excuse the cat. With that, I think we are done with our webinar today. Again, panelists, thank you so much. I am grateful for the work you are doing, and thank you all to our attendees who have joined us. And we have this recorded, so it will be available on our website for viewing forever and ever. Okay, thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.